edition of the Gulf Studies Forum. We hope that this session will complement the first one and will discuss some errors regarding to the time management in the first session and usually the first person to speak in a session will dominate the time, and so there are many strategies to fix the errors with time management. Either we deduct time from speakers, 3 minutes each, and this is an idea that we have to deduct 3 minutes from each speaker, to deduct 3 minutes from the allotted time to each speaker, or we could moderate the session and use the entire time and give 15 minutes each, and those in the next session will have to deal with the delay that we've created. Should we continue in the same legacy, in the same traditions? Dr. Abdullah Shaiji, he is one of those responsible for delaying this session in the first place. And I'm taking too long in the introduction after the time that was taken by the first speakers, but I'm waiting for the people to come from outside. We will start with the agenda or the main topics in this session. I would like to welcome the panelists, and we will start with the first speaker, Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghailani. He is a researcher on the topic of Gulf Strategies Affairs. He holds a PhD in international relations from the Durham University in the UK. He has participated in numerous forums and international conferences inside and outside the Gulf. His research interests focus on political thought, U.S. foreign policy, and strategic affairs of the Gulf Arab states. And he has many works related to the ideologies of the region. His paper is entitled GCC Security Amid Mashreq Transformations between absent consensus and multiple threats. You have 13 to 15 minutes. What do you think? 15? 15. You have 15 minutes. So we will follow those who preceded us and take the entire time allotted to us, and those who will follow will deal with it the same way. So I will be quite accurate in adhering to the time allotted to us. Okay. Peace and God's mercy and blessings be upon you. Praise Allah, and peace and mercy be upon Prophet Muhammad and his family and companions. So, these sessions, as per my understanding, are to produce ideas and not to reproduce information and narratives. And so, I will not be narrating information, mere information, because most of you are well aware of these information and these narratives. And we will try as much as possible to come up with the ideas that direct our thinking. The main starting point for this central topic in this forum is the reflection of repercussions that were manufactured by the Al-Aqsa flood on the entire Arab Mashreq in general and the Gulf region in specific. I will not talk about these repercussions and what was made by the Al-Aqsa flood because you are well aware of that. But there is a root transformation in political maps in the Arab region in general. And in my estimation, these impacts and repercussions are still taking form, meaning that these repercussions were not are yet to take a full form, a full shape. They are being shaped right now, and we will see their impact later. But the limit of certainty that we have now is that we have political transformations, intellectual and spiritual transformations, and no, regardless of whether you agree or not with Al-Aqsa flood and what it produced, the repercussions it produced, and regardless of your ideological and political stance on this battle, We can only agree that there are repercussions and impact that was created by the Al Aqsa flood, which are many. I would like to discuss some things that are said, including the fact that Al Aqsa flood exposed the Arab system or the Arab order, as if the Arab order is designed to be otherwise, to be something else than what it was after the Al Aqsa flood. Let's all agree on this. The Arab order or system is designed to be this way, and so the responses or approaches that were issued by the Arab system, Arab order after Al Aqsa flood were quite expected. And if it was the other way around, it would not have been expected. So the it wasn't odd or surprising for the Arab order to issue such stances because it was designed to issue such statements. Also, the rising of the Gulf region into leading roles. This is something that we can discuss. It is right on one hand, but it needs to some discussion in detail on the other. So, is the Gulf region today leading the Arab regional order? Is the Gulf region capable strategically to uphold the roles that were taken by central countries such as Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and perhaps Morocco and Algeria in the Maghreb. So, yes, from the outside, we can say that the Gulf region has risen to a leadership role. It is still a bloc that is cohesive in the region after the fragmentation of major countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and so on and so forth. And so this is an extraordinary case historically, not because the Gulf countries sought to be in this position and not because they repositioned themselves strategically and became in a leadership role at the level of the Arab order. No, the repercussions of events have produced this situation. So, going back to the question, are Gulf countries with their status quo capable of upholding leadership roles in the Arab region? In silos, no, but collectively, yes. Is there reality nowadays? The reality of these Gulf countries in terms of owning the tools to uphold these roles? Does it qualify them for these roles? I'm saying no. There is power, yes, but it hasn't been activated yet. So we shouldn't overestimate this extraordinary historic situation that might end soon. But these GCC countries have a latent power, some kind of strategic potential that, if realized, Gulf countries can uphold central leadership role at the level of the Arab order. So now our topic is, what are the threats faced by the Gulf region in light of these repercussions produced by Al Aqsa flood? And they existed before. Their roots have been there before this moment. So I believe that a chronic threat is the lack of a Gulf unanimity, and the GCC was established because of that. Since day one, there was no Gulf unanimity towards the major issues. There is division, there is fragmentation in Gulf stances. There are so many approaches at hand to the point where they clash with each other. Gulf countries did not agree on a strategic philosophy or a security philosophy when it comes to the arrangement of regional security. So, this lack of unanimity produces many variations and divisions within the GCC, and this is a source of threat. Why is it a source of threat? Because it fragments the potential. It doesn't. enable the Gulf to accumulate power and reposition themselves regarding the regional issues. So the lack of unanimity philosophically, ideologically, and politically is a source of threat. And this, as I said, is a chronic issue. And another source of threat is the lack of constitutional reforms in the Gulf. I believe this is a dire critical issue because facing a deadlock in these reforms and not them moving from the only an appearance to a real change is just putting the public opinion in the shadows. The strategic decision making is not highlighted, is absent today nowadays, and it seems that the political system in the Gulf region is apprehensive about going forward with constitutional reforms, and so taking or engaging the public opinion in these processes. So not engaging the public opinion or absence of public opinion in major decisions is a source of state, because the strategic mind in the Gulf region has really narrow-minded pathways that ignores the public opinion. Also, the Israeli threat, and I'm not talking about the normalization only. Normalization is dangerous, but Israel is a source of threat in its own on three levels. The first of which, there is a hijacking, a situation of hijacking within the strategic decision making in the region. Many stances nowadays, be it the stance towards the Yemeni file, Iran, the Palestinian resistance, where it is clear that there are influences that are not only American but also Israeli in policy making and approaches towards these issues. Normalization is not in its traditional definition. It it is a quality normalization, meaning that the Israeli approach wants to penetrate culturally, ideologically, and politically. So it is not limited to reciprocal relations and embassies. No, Israel will go forward beyond that and penetrate the region. And something that is no less dangerous than all of that is that Israel is introducing itself vis-a-vis Gulf acceptance. Unfortunately, it's introducing themselves as a security partner in the region, considering that Israel is capable of confronting the Iranian threat in the region. So the Israeli threat is one of the security direct sources of threat. Also, the Iranian project, despite the fact that Iran was subject to a growing weakness after the engagement or the war between it and Israel, and the situation, the state of weakness in the Iranian arms penetrating Iraq and Syria and Yemen. However, the Iranian project is still existent in its roots and it's causing confusion. The problem is that it's not the fact that there is an Iranian project in the region. The problem is that there is no Gulf unanimity on approaching the Iranian relations. The Iranian project is feeding on the fragmentation and the variation of stances in the Gulf region, and it's feeding on the U.S. practices of terrorizing or intimidating the Gulf region and weaponizing it in the US Iranian conflict. And I believe this has been an issue that has been standing for a long time. So, Gulf countries need to agree on a unified approach to their relations with Iran. Also, the abduction of the Gulf sovereignty by the USA, and this is something we are well aware of. And speaking of reduction, to the strategic importance of the Gulf region in the strategic American vision. I do not agree with this opinion. The Gulf region has always been and will always be important, despite the speeches that delivered by Trump or the people before him or after him. The Gulf region is still and will still have a strategic importance in the American vision. Unfortunately, the consecutive US administrations use the Gulf region as a tool for their conflicts with Iran and other parties. Also, the Gulf sovereignty is abducted for the interest of the USA. The Yemeni want is a threat. With Yemen, we have two choices. Either Yemen can be an added value for the security of the Gulf region or for it to become a direct threat as it is today. So the multiple approaches in the Gulf towards the Yemen file has turned Yemen a direct threat for the joint security of the Gulf region. And now nowadays we can see the exacerbation of the Yemeni situation towards more fragmentation. Even the Houthis getting to power was with Gulf participation. The Houthis could not have been in power and take control of authorities in Sana'a if there wasn't any participation from the Gulf. And now the entire Gulf region is struggling with the transformations that are taking place in Yemen, specifically the three countries engaged directly in the Yemeni crisis: Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the Sultanate of Oman, and specifically Oman and Saudi Arabia, because the Yemeni crisis has direct threats, poses direct threats to Saudi Arabia and Oman due to the geographic proximity, the tribal interconnectivity, and historical connectivity. There are geopolitical repercussions of the Yemeni crisis to both of these countries. So, my main conclusion is this: the way to exit this situation of fragmentation in Gulf stances to regional crises first, to accumulate this fragmented power in the Gulf region. As I said in the beginning, the Gulf region owns potential in its demographics, financially, strategically, but this potential is fragmented, sporadic, and if we do not accumulate this potential, then the region will not escape this weakness, this state of weakness. Also, liberating the Gulf policy from US influence so that it is based on the best interest of the region and not the attraction to the luring of the US policy or accepting to be a tool as a region for the US foreign policy. And third, departing from the situation of decision making, the current decision making by leaderships in the Gulf region. Am I out of time? Yes, you are. I'll stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for respecting the time limit and this paper which were mentioned in the previous session, but you added your own touch. Now we have Dr. Abdullah Rashid Al Mursal, who is an expert in legal, military, and diplomatic in the state of Qatar, and he is a PhD candidate and has a master's degree from Joan bin Jassim Academy and his BA from Beirut University. He has wide-ranging expertise in diplomatic and military positions. His paper is entitled The Arab Gulf States and Mashreq Transformations from the periphery to the center. And this is the title. I don't know why the Gulf countries are referred to as the periphery. They're always at the heart of the actions, but you can say they have been reactive rather than proactive. In the previous session and in this session, Dr. Abdullah covered most of the points I prepared, so therefore I'll try and allude to the points that I think they tried to or they were hoping to mention, but the time limit did not allow them to do so. When we talk about the Gulf, we we are not talking about one bloc militarily and diplomatically. Unfortunately, this is not so. It's natural, of course, that this can happen. These countries have different policies because they are independent and sovereign countries. I think Gulf countries can be divided into two types. Countries which are with the principle of neutrality and the countries which are very influential in the international and regional. The, the active ones, the proactive ones are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE for the last decade and a half, maybe, and through the changes and transformations we saw in the Arab Mashreq. And it was a question in the previous session that were these transformations really transformations or are they just writings on the wall, the prospects of one? I think they are just preparations and which pave the way and are not actual transformations. What will happen will change the political map and in the so-called new Middle East. The position of the Gulf has, as just and the other speakers alluded to the Al-Aqsa flood and what was before the Arab Spring and after it. The Arab Spring has created a huge earthquake in the street. In the Mashreq transformations, I think we can talk about four transformations or prelude to transformations like the collapse of countries, Iraq 2003 and Syria in 2010 or 11, Yemen 2014, and the wars, the proxy wars through non-state actors, militias, and extremist powers which have spread in the Yemen and the Fertile Crescent. The other point is the waves of displacement which happened mainly in Syria, and they were not confined to the borders, national borders, but they impacted other countries. Also, the redrawing of the energy landscape or map. How did the Gulf countries react? This was through both soft power and hard power. Soft power was there before and practiced a long time, maybe not as obvious as what Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE are doing now, but nonetheless it was there. As for the hard power, this is something new to the foreign policy of Gulf state countries like the 2015 Saudi military intervention in Yemen. This was a precedent, in fact, when Gulf countries resort to military force to interfere in another country, and also the talk of other military interventions in Sudan and Mashreq by certain Gulf countries. As for the soft power, Qatar heads the list in this, in practicing soft power through humanitarian aid, through the media, and using the media to support some Mashreq countries, and through mediation, of course. And for this, Qatar paid a price worth paying if it's in return for ending disputes and achieving some just solutions for others. The military strike was a message by Israel to countries not to interfere. In fact, it produced the opposite effect to Israel, and this military strike, through my military background, in fact, it did not represent a real strike in the military sense to a military component or an attack on the sovereignty. It was all of that, but it was also a blatant use of disproportionate force against a target which is not military or diplomatic or anything, and it happens to be in a country which was not part of the military conflict anyway. And as Dr. Abdullah Shaiji said, the war on Gaza exposed not only the Arab order but the international order also, because what is happening in Gaza is exactly a genocide. Some say it's a crime against humanity or a war crime. No, it is a fully fledged genocide, and this is what has happened. And the reaction to it was from all over the world, and yet everybody kept silent afterwards. In my paper, I wanted to go beyond the traditional approaches talking about a balance with Iran, counterbalancing Iran, the energy and other aspects, and the Gulf countries can use their soft power and hard power if needs be, like what happened in Yemen and other countries through the military intervention by certain countries. The most important transformation is the collapse of regimes like what happened in Iraq in 2003, which was the result of this jaundiced, wrong policy of America and the region, because they interfered and they tried to destroy the national fabric of Iraq, and as a result of that, the terrorist organizations which appeared and destroyed Iraq within, and then Syria became an arena for confrontation before the fall of the Assad regime. Now we have a new regime which is trying to rebuild the state or the homeland, in fact, and to reconciliate, and this constitutes a challenge really to the ability of Gulf countries to influence of the affairs, and they're trying to help Syria through reconstruction. Although some are talking about certain conditions imposed by the Gulf countries on the new Syrian regime by Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and Turkey. And of course, there are the resupply routes and the gas pipelines, and there was talk of laying down pipelines, gas pipelines, but the events in Syria have and the subsequent Russian interference led to some obstruction to that project, and they caused the failure of that project to suffocate the European countries and make them rely on the Russian supplies only. This, of course, Saudi Arabia led some efforts to rehabilitate the Assad regime before it, its collapse. Now they are leading efforts to rehabilitate the new regime in Syria. And of course, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's mediation with Trump to lift the sanctions on Syria. This is a good thing, of course, and this is a policy by some Gulf countries they agreed on. So, what are the challenges now uh, between the Arab Mashreq countries and the Gulf? I think the biggest challenge is the rivalry and the inter disputes between the Gulf countries themselves. They are ideological in some aspects. Some active countries support political Islam, for example, others don't. The Abraham Accords, which the United States is trying to impose on the Gulf countries, but the Gulf countries did not agree on. Some countries signed and agreed to it and normalized with Israel. Some are on their way to do so or not, God knows, but this is nonetheless a point of difference in dealing with events and transformations in the region. I don't want to take too much of your time. I'll try and conclude quickly. The main actors in the region are Israel, Turkey, and Iran. Can the Gulf countries face up to these countries and keep up with them and from their own strategic? Are we in a direct confrontation with Israel? Are we able to, through our soft power, or through our military, political, and economic power, we do not want to exaggerate the ability of Gulf countries, but at the same time, we have to know that we have the potential, the potency to cooperate and to help the Mashreq to rebuild a defensive wall against the threats in the future. And if we take this as prospects of a new change, unfortunately, since World War II until now, no Arab collective regime has proven solid enough and to chart joint policies of, and execute them, the kind of integrated foreign policies which are in line with what their countries, what people, their peoples aspire to. We have to revisit the very concept of the GCC itself in order to establish a collective way of doing things. Some Gulf countries have huge soft power, others have hard power, they have the strategic position, we have strong economic positions that we can impact not the regional order but the international order in a way which can serve our countries and our people and our interests. Thank you, Mr. Abdullah.
And thank you for committing to the time allotted to you. The third speaker is Dr. Sultan Khlefi. He is a senior researcher at the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, whose work focuses on mediation and conflict resolution. He holds PhD in political science from the University of Glasgow. His research primarily centers on Qatari foreign policy, with particular emphasis on Qatar's mediation and peace building. His work seeks to deepen understanding of Qatar's diplomatic strategies and their contributions to the resolution of regional and international conflicts. His paper today is entitled Mashreq Transformations and Gulf Great Power Realignment Status Enhancement Perspective. Go ahead. You have the same amount of time, which is 15 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Doctor. Peace and God's mercy and blessings be upon you, distinguished attendees, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to talk to you about the Gulf Great Power Realignment and Status Seeking term as a framework to interpret the transformations in the Gulf relations with major powers. This paper is based on a main hypothesis that many practices of the Gulf region cannot be understood sufficiently with the traditional realistic approaches. The approach needs to take into consideration acknowledgement and hierarchy and role distribution within the world order. And based on that, I'll try in this presentation to analyze the cases of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE as different models of the variant strategies for enhancing their status. So, status seeking provides a more convincing interpretation compared to the realistic approach to the transformations because it provides trends of behaviors that cannot be restricted to a materialistic or interest enhancing approaches. And it's specified by security and power, and Gulf states are adopting costly strategies based on reputation, and it doesn't enhance directly their status and their engagement with multiple powers is hedging with the recession of the US commitment. It reflects repositioning themselves within the hierarchy and seeking to be recognized as responsible, relatively independent states. The initiatives of mediation and high level policies and participating in international governance always provides limited returns, but it provides returns in status, visibility, and acknowledgement from other international actors. And the status seeking theory explains the Gulf states' efforts to be depicted as responsible partners and not just protected allies, hosting negotiations, sponsoring institutions, and contributing to public goods targets societal acknowledgement rather than determined. And last but not least, this realism faces difficulty in interpreting the strategies to major powers themselves, and status seeking methodology explains this by highlighting the competitiveness of the best, the powers that are seeking the best interest for the world order and facing the structural common constraints. And the paper relies on this theory, and the status seeking in the world order refers to the ranking of a country in the world order as per characteristics that are deemed valuable. There is the G20 group as well. Anyone who has a membership in these groups has a certain sort of status that cannot be achieved outside of this group. And as Aaron shown stresses, these definitions which agree with Deborah Larson, clarify that status has three main traits. They are based on a position and relations with other actors within a hierarchy, and they are cognitive because they are about the perceptions of the actors and others' perceptions of them, as is indicated by other researchers. It is related to acknowledgement. There is a need to accept these members of a group by other actors, also these societal or social characteristics, because these are collective beliefs about an actor in comparison to others. This is reaffirmed by Walworth and Newell regarding international hierarchy. All of these characteristics are important, but here we are focusing on the social perspective or dimension, since it's the most important, as highlighted by Wolford and Newman, and it's not related to the bilateral relation between two countries, but about the social relations in a more extensive arena of countries. And it's not about country A or B, it's about widespread relations related to a country, and they are changeable within a political group, specific political group. As a result of that, the concerns of status is not only about their ranking in hierarchy, as Newman says, it is a concern, central concern for small and medium sized countries. This is at odds with the conviction that status is seeking is related to only bigger powers. This is a structural characteristic of the world order in general, even though it has different tools. And in the context of this theoretical context of the Gulf region, Qatar is an actor that uses mediation in its foreign policy, which enhances its international status. For Qatar, mediation is not a circumstance based diplomacy, it is part of its identity and international positioning, at odds with Saudi Arabia and UAE, who blend between kinds of power. Qatar wanted to separate status from military dominance, and this is reaffirmed by the literature. For geographically small countries, seeking status with pathways that do not require military power is something that is imperative, and we can understand this mediation as social creativity as per the social identity theory and studies of status seeking rather than competing on traditional indicators regionally. The country has redefined international criteria by focusing on reaching out to non-state actors, hosting highly sensitive political discussions and deliberations. This seeks the status within these groups. The status seeking in Qatari is not classically neutral. It is politically engaged, and as Qatar introduces itself as a country that approaches various parties, non state actors like Hamas, and this produces a particular status, and it reserves its necessary channels of communication internationally, even when this engagement is not politically comfortable for the main powers. And this political action is good, and it enhances the Qatari status as well. This goes in line with Parf Wilford and saying that status is identified as per the prevalent criteria, and in conflict management, the Qatari mediation has become the criteria, and the gains of Qatar in mediation are based on status, especially recognized by the USA. Given their international dominance, they host negotiation sessions that relieve the burden from major powers, especially approaching non-state actors that cannot be approached by the USA. And negotiations between Taliban and the USA, and also the facilitation of the release of detainees. Qatar has become an indispensable actor, like in Norway and other examples. So there's acknowledgement that it goes beyond or punching above its weight. This reaffirms that it has achieved a higher status without challenging the international hierarchy. It is important to indicate that Qatar does not want to compete with major countries. It uses the neighborhood policy and positioning itself with the major powers as a reliable party, and this achieves tangible benefits to Qatar. However, the risks of the reputation that Qatar has upheld indicates that this is not only a tool. There were political pressures and accusations of biases, as well as diplomatic costs related to hosting controversial negotiators, and positioning these costs within the hedging balancing is hard because status seeking after status seeking, retaining this status is difficult in order not to lose the status. And so we need to reactivate the Qatari diplomacy. If mediation was not overlooked, but it was described as the main source of pivotal status despite the regional challenges. As for Saudi Arabia, this was related to the exchange of detainees on the Ukrainian war, and the Jeddah dialogue was intentional repositioning of Saudi Arabia to instill international law. This is done with various accords, and they reintegrated Syria after the fall of the Al Assad regime and convinced President Trump to meet with Al Sharia in a step that reflects its work in regional positioning. And we shouldn't understand the Saudi Vision 2030 as economic transformation only, but a strategic project to seek status that aims to upgrade the criteria. They are repositioning themselves in hierarchies by reconstructing themselves to the internal audiences. And this has a framework of modernity, sustainability, innovation, social integration, and future governance. These are all indicators that are recognized for the responsibility of a state in the contemporary international community. Also, this paves the way for Saudi Arabia to align itself with the international criteria, with international major forces and markets, and hosting major events such as G20 meetings and sports and economic events is a symbolic role in the international hierarchy, which instills the status of Saudi Arabia as an active actor in the international community. As for UAE, the Emirati strategy seeks status with a focus on its role in administrative efficiency and institutional efficiency. The COP28, hosting the COP28, instilled that status as it is a strong indication for institutional centrality and international centrality, as the hosting country is proving its existence and reaffirms its ability to manage processes between complicated parties. Via COP28, UAE introduced itself as an actor in climate change and cooperation between energy producers and consumers. And this approach has depicted the climate response, and hosting the COP28 instilled Dubai's role in elite circles and its ability to finance and manage international events. And so this highlights that Gulf countries do not only respond to the balances of power, they are, based on their awareness, engage in the international hierarchy based on symbolic contributions to seek status, to seek recognition. And this gives us a perspective that is more capable of understanding this differentiation of approaches, even though they have structural similarities, but their different approaches helps us understand, have a more in-depth understanding of their status seeking and first to position themselves internationally. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sultan, for this presentation and for adhering to the time allotted to you. We will now give the opportunity to the to attendees to ask questions or make remarks. Please start by introducing them yourselves. Thank you very much, Asad Al Shablan. I thank the panelists for their interesting research papers. I have a question for each one of the panelists. The first speaker, when we talk about the Arab order and its failure, I think that we all agree that such important activities, we need to test the accuracy of concepts rather than narrate information. I agree with you in what you've mentioned. The question here, when we talk about Arab order, we use are we using the term correctly or not? My understanding of an order is for it to have rules and an organization of actors, state actors, and with a way to regulate all of them, and most importantly, the relations between among these units would be internal relations. So when one party is impacted or affected in this order, all other parties are affected as well. And this doesn't happen. This is not clear in the Arab world. If something happens in the an Arab state, it affects the Arab countries, yes, but it affects Turkey, Iran, and other far countries. So, in what sense are we approaching or discussing an Arab order here? We might have to find another term to describe the Arab congregation, and also can you please stop here? Just commenting on Israel. It's doubtless here nowadays that there is a strategy, the Israeli strategy. How do we confront it? For the Gulf countries, they used to think that Israel is not a direct threat and that they are rational, even they have if they have nuclear weapons. But nowadays, this is different. How do we confront it? And the main important thing is that Israel doesn't have a power of its own. It feeds off of America and Europe. And in the future, we will find serious Gulf European American discussions about how to contain this threat from its sources, external sources. And last but not least, just because I would like to congratulate you on this paper, but the question here, the world is talking about small countries and status seeking and seeking security, but you said that it's not an attempt to seek security. So if it's not seeking that and it's related to the world order, then what is the source of a status? What is the source of a status? Is the source a leader? There, because they are important in the context of other things.
Thank you, Dr. Zaid, please. Please don't take too much time. I want to take, we don't have enough time. Be brief, please. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Hadi, and thank you to all our speakers. And Dr. Sultan is a unifying paper. I want to say that we, the GCC Council, we have moved from the inward looking isolationist position to an expansionist one. There were major countries like Egypt, Iraq, or Syria. Now these countries have collapsed, so we have become a frontline countries, if I can call it that, and in confrontation with Israel too. And maybe Dr. Abdullah Gailan, how we can program a vision for the GCC, like Dr. Khalid said, whether through mini multilateralism or otherwise, to first of all restore stability to our neighbors in the Mashreq, or to find solutions for our problems like the Yemen problem, which is a Yemeni, Omani, Saudi problem. Please, I am not going to have enough time. We have Salam alaikum, Majid Turki from the Russian Studies Center. We don't have time. Just a question, please. I have a problem in understanding this Arab framework, whether we're talking about through the pan-Arab, pan-nationalist umbrella, which produced all the negative things. We still are trying to repeat that and recycle it. The success in the Gulf countries is due to the more common denominators than the rest of the Arab world. We took the Arab aspect with all its problems and ignored the Islamic part. Uh, I, I, when people, when academics say that no balance in the world can be achieved without the presence of an Islamic balancing power. They talked about Baghdad and the Abbasids. I want to ask a question. Is this a philosophical, academic view, or is it a realistic view? He said, no, it's a realistic. We have to have an Islamic balancing power. I don't think any Gulf party can be active without coordination with major powers. Maybe we can act on behalf and as proxies to other powers. A question to my Sultan: what are the problems that the Gulf countries manage to solve in isolation with the major powers and in a way to fulfill the interests of Gulf countries? Please, Imam Lawati. Thank you to the speakers. My question is Dr. Abdullah Al Ghailani clarified these contradictions, but what combines the GCC countries and of course, when we talk about Gulf unity, this is far reaching, but now the GCC within the regional groupings. But to what extent can we say we, we can remove these contradictions which do not help the Gulf countries themselves and their peoples? And also, how can we make the role of the GCC from a a role of countries which serve other countries like the US, a functional role to achieving our own interests to solve our problems. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saif. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Hadi. My question to Dr. Ghelani. I noticed that our political scientists, when you talked about the Yemen question, and when the Transitional Council of the South imposing its control, where is the question of Yemen leading to? Thank you. Dr. Sefer, maybe. Ahmed Azim from Qatar University. I think Dr. Asad dealt with the Arab order. I think the question of leadership, as Dr. Abdullah Al Ghilani, I feel that from the previous sessions, that there is some sort of an insistence that the role of the Gulf countries has not reached the level of leadership. This is true because to play such a role, you need a project behind it. But the Gulf role is increasing. And for the sake of time, when we talk about what happened in Gaza and the Aqsa flood, the Arab role was too late to arrive. But the Arab Islamic Summit and the alliance for the two-state solution, which led to Saudi Arabia, and then the New York Declaration led by France with Saudi Arabia. I think these three were a separate track from other powers. So there was some sort of direct confrontation with the American approach, and it was apparent that the Gulf role would be important. Maybe to have a unified project, this is too ambitious, but as a role and as an impact, you have no choice but to play it, like Doctor said. Thank you. The problems will come to you if you don't go to solve them. Please identify yourself. I'm Ted Debris. I, I think I commend an Arab system. There is an Arab frame. They have some sort of frame, but they do not behave. I think the war on Gaza has exposed many things. Like Dr. Azim said, there is no leadership, no vision, no project. In any event, the Islamic dimension has its shortcomings. The Saudi role combines the Arab and the Islamic role in a good way, but there is maybe there is no solution without a joint security. And whether we like it or not, Iran is part of it, even if we hate that. My question to Dr. Sultan, and specifically on the Qatari mediation, can the Qatari mediation continue with the presence of Trump? In 2024, I wrote a paper on the Qatari successes in 2023. This was 2 years ago. I said that the biggest challenge is the return of Trump to power. Now, the conflicts started by Trump closed the door on any mediation. Thank you very much. Maybe less than 1 minute. Dr. Sultan Fawzi Ruwaiti from Middle East Center. There are think tanks in America which talk about the Sharm el-Sheikh to form a peace council, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, in addition to Jordan, Turkey, and Israel. اسمي
A candidate at Gulf Study Center. My question is to Dr. Abdullah. You talked about the call for unanimity in the GCC leadership. So I wanted to ask you, what are the problems that you see that keeps them from being unanimous? Or in other way, do you see that the Gulf leaders have the perception that the unanimity works in their interest? Thank you.
شكرا لك.
Thank you very much. We go back to our speakers in a reverse order. And 3 minutes, please. We cannot go beyond 3 minutes because we're already running so late. Dr. Asad, where is the status coming from? What's its source? it has its sources within the state, but it's built on the actions of the state, and it's based on a willingness on the way you read the situation and the roles you can play. Maybe it can change with the change of leadership, but in the case of Qatar, with the change of leadership, the role continued. Also, in the UAE case, there was an expansion with the change of leadership, and the Saudi Arabia the same. We didn't see Saudi Arabia playing a role in the summit meetings on the climate changes, for example. Now they do. They have a bigger role in mediation. And this indicates that they have a more knowledgeable way of reading the situation and reacting to it. As for which problems the Gulf countries managed to solve without instructions from foreign countries, Qatari mediation played a role in solving the dispute between political parties in Sudan in the 1990s. The humanitarian aid to many countries by Qatar and other countries, which has nothing to do with any instructions from any international powers. As for the relationship between the region and the international powers, this is based on the interest, the general interest of all parties. As for Mr. Amjad's question, continuing Qatari mediation with the presence of Trump, I think the USA seeks a Qatari role in mediation because the renewal of the trust and confidence in Qatar's role, and especially in the first Trump administration, when Qatar contributed to ending the war in Afghanistan, and America benefited from Qatar's role, and the whole world benefited from that. And in the agreement with the Colombian government, with factions, and the mediation between Venezuela and the USA, Congo, and Rwanda, of course, the mediators cannot bear all the burden. It depends on the other belligerent parties too. As for Mr. Fauzi, I think uh, the arrogance by Israel will always negatively impact this view of a regional security arrangement. Dr. Abdullah. Dr. Assad asking about confrontation with Israel. Confrontation with Israel, since the establishment of this entity, we are in a constant confrontation with it throughout the years, for the last 70 years. But the confrontation has not changed or moved into a military. I'm talking about Gulf countries specifically, except when it happened lately when this surprise attack by Israel on the state of Qatar, which is a precedent, a precedent in the relations with Israel and Gulf countries. And this indicates that there can be a military confrontation, which was almost totally excluded in the past, but now it can be possible. Are we ready and prepared for that? Are we talking about the security of energy sources? And the Gulf countries are not proxies to the United States, but our political security and energy security has been linked to the US through the Carter doctrine, and which came as after the Lyndon Johnson's Vietnam doctrine. The last attack has shaken the confidence of the allies of the United States as to how serious the U.S. is in protecting the Gulf countries from any outside attack, especially when there is a question of interest, like Israel's interests are stronger with the American than that of the Gulf countries. And the United States' search for new forms of relations or resources, and this is their right, of course. Uh, Trump, so far as we can see, that is passing on the responsibility as what happens with Europe. He wants to avoid responsibility. He transfers responsibility to other countries, whether in the Russia-Ukraine war in Europe or in his other policies with the Gulf countries in the region. Thank you for respecting the time. Dr. Abdullah, 3 minutes, please. First of all, regarding what Dr. Asad Shamlan has said about the Arab order or system, this does not necessarily mean that there is a political order or system which works under the same umbrella based on the same visions. No, this term means that there are regimes which rule this part of the world who may not reflect the will of their people. And apart from the Gulf countries, they did not achieve much for their population. So you are with a fragmented order which is weak, it's unable to deal with the crisis, it cannot fully practice its sovereignty. So we we call it an Arab order by necessity of the reality of the situation. The Gulf countries have no choice to engage with Israel or not. You have to engage with this aggressive power. Israel no longer accepts the normalization through diplomacy. Israel's policy now wants to dismantle the only cohesive order, and Netanyahu, in one of his latest statements, he threatened to annex Kuwait and parts of Saudi Arabia. So people in this region, they have no choice but to prepare yourself for that moment of confrontation with Israel, and just to rely on normalization and attracting Israel with investment. I think this is a lost policy. Mr. Saif, if you want us to move from soft language to hard language, provided that you bear the responsibility, I think the Houthis reaching Sana'a and ruling Yemen was a Gulf decision, and weakening the legitimate government and turning it from a power which could have been effective to ended up with just leaving it as a title or a name. And this was a Gulf decision to dismantle it, to weaken it. Also, the inner fighting between the north and the south in Yemen is a Gulf decision. So these are confronting and conflicting decisions in Yemen. The Yemeni crisis either should be an added value strategically to Gulf security, or it can be a source of strategic threat to the Gulf security. I think we are on the second track. Yemen, with its inner fighting, constitutes a direct threat to Gulf security and Saudi Arabia, Oman, and UAE specifically. And these countries, unless they revisit their policies, I think we are moving towards a complete collapse, and we get to that stage, then the repercussions will be painful indeed. As for the question, why can't this Gulf bloc to achieve the minimum of accumulating the power? I think these are all national opinions. The mind, the attitude which forms the policies at the national level in each Gulf country still fears this kind of unity because they fear that having a joint vision will impact and undermine their national sovereignty. So the strategic mind in every country at the national level has not yet reached a conviction that moving from this fragmentation that the GCC suffers from and to move into the minimum degree of closeness is an absolute need now, but until now they have not reached this degree of maturity. That's why we see the implications on the Gulf security, the Yemen, Iran, even dealing with Arab crisis in Egypt, in Sudan, in Libya, in Syria. I think we are very close indeed to a point of collapse and very negative impact on the security of the Gulf. Thank you very much to all our speakers. And we try to catch up with time. I think all our speakers get, I think we managed some, and